Welcome to MasterMind Minutes, the podcast that focuses on the franchise industry. We'll cover topics that are important to franchisees as well as franchisors and share interesting insights that will help you build your business. We have one guest, we ask one question, and we do this in minutes, not hours. Hello again, and welcome to another edition of MasterMind Minutes. My name is Gary Occhigrosso. I am the founder and managing partner of Franchise Growth Solutions, and as you know, the publisher of FranchiseMoneymaker.com, the longest running online magazine for franchisees, franchisors, and entrepreneurs at large. For those of you joining us for the first time here on MasterMind Minutes, the concept is really simple. We have one guest, we ask one question, and we get one answer. We do it in minutes, not hours, and we realize that that's generally not enough time for most people. So at the end of the program, our guest will give you contact information. Feel free to reach out to him if you have a question about his company or about what he does and whatever. So today, my guest is my friend, John Francis, who also in our industry is known as Johnny Franchise. I'm sure a lot of you know him as that. But John is definitely an enthusiastic, engaging, and more importantly, an expert speaker and advisor in the world of franchising. He shares his experience and his knowledge and his network with folks really all around the country. And I've heard him speak several times. He definitely speaks from the heart with what I would call a servant attitude, which I love because that's what it's really all about. Franchising is in his blood. I think he was born into it. He'll tell us about that. His parents were true pioneers in the industry. They turned the haircutting business that they had into 1,000+ unit franchise brand over the years on an international level. So John absolutely knows, you know, the industry and where he comes from. He's been both a franchisee and a franchisor multiple times, which I love because you see it from both sides of the table. And no doubt he has a deep understanding of the industry. He's worked in it for 30 years. With private companies, collaborating with more than 50 brands. As I tell folks who I've introduced to John, you know, he can really help you and your franchisees, if you're a franchisor, really learn about the industry and do better. So John, I can't thank you enough for being with us. Long overdue, long overdue.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah.
Before we get into the question, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you've been doing these days, and then we'll get into our question because we really have an important topic today.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Gary. It's good to be with you and good to be here on your show. And, you know, I grew up in a franchise. As you mentioned, my dad was a barber here in Minnesota back in the 50s before I was even born. And long story short, he and my mother franchised the barbershops back in the 60s. And again, before I was even born. And so I grew up thinking everything was a franchise and everybody worked for themselves except the people that worked for us. And everybody owned 2 or 3 businesses. My dad was quite an entrepreneur, quite a pioneer, and he did a great job building that franchise business for barbers. He changed the industry for hair salons. He created an opportunity for barbers to really become business owners and not just cutting hair, but actually running a business. And we scaled that organization with multiple brands and different segments of the salon industry. And that's what I grew up with. So, you know, I as a young kid, it was our family business was talk at the dinner table was about the company. And it was all about hair salons and franchising and beauty products and real estate and franchisees and hairdressers and all the things that go along with it. So I grew up in that environment, and you know, little did I realize just what an education I was getting all along the way. So in high school and college, I worked with my family. I had an older brother in the business. I worked with him for several years. He was a franchisee. We had a ton of stuff. Like I said, my dad was one of those wild entrepreneurs who I don't think he ever saw a bad deal or never met anyone he couldn't trust. So he was pretty aggressive and you know, he grew up with almost nothing. I mean, very poor, simple background. So he was really motivated to grow and expand and help other people. He brought a lot of people along with him. And like I said, he changed the salon industry. And then some of the things we did as a franchisor changed the franchise industry, and some of the best practices that people do have used today for the last 30, 40 years were things that we were doing in our company. My parents are in the IFA Hall of Fame together as husband and wife, which is pretty fantastic.
Wow, that is, it's interesting because I grew up in a family business also, and it was a bakery, Italian pastries, but the talk around the table was about Italian pastries, not about franchising. So it's interesting that first of all, I find it incredibly intriguing that back then, we'll say the 50s, that your mom and dad and your dad had this barbershop and he was thinking what we would say today out of the box, thinking big
Yeah,
and
yeah.
not about being a barber, but about not about expanding the brand. And I think something you said later on that's really interesting because it definitely I know where you get it from about the servant attitude is you said what he wanted to do was he wanted to put barbers in their own business so they weren't just working for someone. And that is helping people. That is really, really helping people take control of their own lives, their own destiny. So um,
Yeah.
that's very admirable and that's a great history. And now I know why you know what you know about franchising. You grew up in it.
Well, the story is my dad was a great guy, great leader, a true entrepreneur in every sense of the word. Just kind of risk was not in his vocabulary. He was a hard worker, very driven, a nice guy. He had a lot of friends and kind of did things the right way. He high integrity and was not afraid of taking risks and trying to help people. He said, if you can find opportunity in my opportunity, we all win. And that was his attitude. And that's what I grew up with.
That's terrific. Well, all right, on to our question because it definitely ties into sort of the intro here without a doubt. We hear a lot about coaching and consulting and learning on the franchisee side. And what do I mean by that? Yeah, I think last year we had Red Boswell on, who's the president of IFPG, big broker network, and
Yeah.
just consultants. And there's a lot of education out there if you want to buy a franchise or become a franchisee. You can find out so much about the industry from that side of the table, and you can learn about it in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm.
However, where you're focused now and where I'm focused is the franchisor side. So someone
Right.
launches a franchise, well, maybe they've been in, I don't know, pick a business, the pizza business, okay? And they're really
Right.
good at making pizza, but now they're in the franchising business. How do they get knowledge? Who coaches them? Where do they turn in terms of, getting experience or knowledge for experience to help their franchisees? Who's coaching them? And what sort of material or what sort of assets are available to people who want to learn about being a franchisor, not a franchisee. And I
Yeah.
think that's where you come in. So where do you see the importance of that? And how do you feel that you have been able to address that?
Yeah, well, you're right. It's a good question, and there's a lot of need out there. Selling franchises and becoming a franchisee is relatively straightforward. But becoming a franchisor is much more complicated. And when I get calls from folks, and I'm happy to talk to people all the time, and they say, I want to franchise my whatever business, I usually try to scare them out of it, because I say, you got to understand the commitment you're making, right? To become a franchise company takes you out of whatever business you started with. And now you've got a franchise business, which is completely different skill set, different regulations, rules, and all kinds of complexities that you may not understand. So I know there are consultants and groups out there like you and several others out there that do a nice job of putting a group together and giving them the appropriate documents and the structural aspects and showing them kind of what they need to do. I talk about commitment and really commitment to the long term, to the long game. For a little while there, maybe in recent history, it was all about, I'm going to crank up a franchise. I'm going to sell as many as I possibly can, put as many dots on the map, and then flip the whole thing to private equity and make off with a big bag of money. Well, I really think that's a bad approach, a flawed approach, and really a disservice to everybody involved. So I'm kind of grateful to see. I think those days are going away. I think people are recognizing how unnecessary that is, and really unhealthy that is. And I think people are moving beyond ego and greed and moving on to higher integrity decision making and commitment to franchising done well. And I think so. So my role, what I like to do is help people get it right. Right. I'm not so much of a startup guy. When I give people advice to start a franchise, I usually suggest you should build another unit. I say your first unit open and that's successful, that's an accident. Go 100 miles away and build another one. And build a second unit successful. Now that's a coincidence. Congratulations. Now go 100 miles the other direction and build a third unit. And if you've got 3 units successful, now that's a pattern. Now you've got some experience and some knowledge about how to open units, how to do the construction, the training, the supply chain, all the other nuts and bolts of putting that business together. Now you're more likely to be prepared to franchise because your franchisees expect that you know how to do what you're doing.
Yep.
So I generally say, you know, most people get to me and they're too early. And I try to give them that advice and say, you know, you really have to be prepared, better prepared. There are books, there are resources, there are plenty of talent out there in the franchise world. But I think most people are looking to really get involved in a brand and either get a piece of that brand or negotiate some kind of an ongoing fee or some kind of an equity deal or whatever. And it's not really where I show up. I usually show up when a brand is something's wrong, they're struggling, they grew too fast or they grew too slow or something's not working anymore. People are unhappy and frustrated and they don't know where to go, what to do. So I show up as kind of a troubleshooter. And I can usually diagnose a problem pretty quickly by asking intelligent questions and really get to the root of, you know, what's causing the problem, and then maybe give that owner 3 or 5 different ways to try to solve that problem or approach the reality there. So I like to work on helping people do franchising better and fix what they have or make it perform better so that everybody wins. When the franchisor does their side and the franchisee does their side and the supplier vendors do their side, when everyone does their part, everybody wins.
Yeah.
In a franchise.
I agree. Let me just jump in here because we've got a lot there to unpack. So, you know, first of all, I love the term doing franchising better. I'm definitely going to use that term because I believe that, and you talked about, you know, it's a team effort, and everybody has to be doing what they're supposed to be doing to make it work. It's interesting. Just the other day, I commented on a LinkedIn post by Kim Parada, and I was echoing essentially what you just said, that, you know, everybody has to be on the same page. Everyone has to have a common goal. But this notion of, in the early part of your statement where, you know, you want a franchise and all you want to do is sell franchises, and that some of that's gone away now and people are starting to maybe focus on the long view. The only thing I would say is, yes, I agree, but I do still hear, to me, it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And look, I love and I'm an advocate for franchising, but I'm not an idiot and I'm very transparent. And I will be the first person to tell you there are many people in our industry that don't take a long view on this. They're just looking to sell franchises, either make commissions if they're salespeople, or if they're a franchisor, just collect fees and hopefully things will work out. But today, and maybe the last year or so, sort of the mantra I've been hearing is this term responsible franchising. And all of a sudden, this is something new.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because the people I hear screaming about responsible franchising are the ones that are selling, you know, 50 units a month. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, from a franchisor's point of view, you mentioned growing too fast, growing too slow. You know, you usually get them when they have some problems. It's like us too. What do you believe the growth pattern should be? Like, for us, we always talk about building infrastructure out in front of your sales program, not the other way around, where they sell them and now they got to figure out how to open them. What's your thoughts on how a franchisor should roll out their company and build that organization so that they can successfully service their franchisees?
Yeah, well, I think that's you're right, and I think there are I would say, growth phases of a franchise brand. You know, when they're new and it's the founder and a handful of people, you know, everyone's a generalist and they're all doing everything to just make things happen and get the stores open and support the franchisees. And then as the franchise grows and scales a little bit, hopefully they don't run out of money or horsepower, right? There's that what I call Death Valley, where they've sold a bunch and they've given away too much of the fees and they don't have the resources to really execute. So hopefully they avoid that or they manage through that phase, and then they grow up to the goal is always royalty self-sufficient, where your
Right.
royalties are paying for the overhead and you don't really need to sell more to just stay open or stay in the business. So as they grow through these phases and cycles of growth, you know, the organizational structure changes. I would say the talent pool on that corporate team changes. And I think the expectation of the franchisees also changes as the brand gets more sophisticated, and there's a difference between just growth and then scale. And that's sometimes really hard to see the difference. And I think that's where people miss the boat. They just want to grow, 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 but they really don't understand the difference to scale, which is leveraging systems and technology and people who can create that scalability of a brand and an operation. And the franchisees, like I said, they go through a growth cycle as well, right? A new franchisee, and then as they mature and grow, they go through a life cycle as a franchisee. And I've spent quite a bit of time talking about that. So I think in the best case, the franchisor is responsibly growing, to me, means they can manage what they've sold. They can execute. They don't get too far out on the limb, or they don't get too far out in the thin ice, if you will. I'm from Minnesota, so we know what that is. You know, you have to be able to balance what you're selling and what you're committing and then what you're executing. And I think it really comes down to franchisees being successful. I think franchisors get in trouble when they forget that they're in the franchise business.
Yeah.
To me, when you're in the franchise business, your primary number one job is creating successful franchisees and
Absolutely.
focusing on those franchisees and helping them have success at that unit level. If a franchisor can totally focus on the franchisee's success, they're going to be just fine. It may
Yep.
not be the fastest growing system that ever saw the world, but they will have long lasting and rewarding success.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen, brother. Let me
Yeah.
just tell you, it's very interesting. When we take on a client, whether it's on the Fran Dev side or even as an FSO, because we do consulting a
Mhm.
little bit different than most of the FSOs out there. Yes, we focus on selling, but we also focus on success. As you're talking successful franchisees, we'll ask our clients. I ask them, my partner doesn't dare. He's a nice guy. I'm kind of an outrageous New York guy. I'll say to them, hey, listen, you have any kids? And more often than not, the franchise, oh, yeah. I'll go, okay, great. So when your kid was born, immediately, a parent wants more for their kid than they want for themselves, right? And they'll
Right.
go, yep. And I'll go, same thing.